And I work in Bangladesh, I work in Pakistan, work in Nepal, many countries. I have several times visited India. And if you visit China, you find that urban area looks quite modern, quite good, right? But if you go to the rural area, you find it's still quite backwarded.
But when you compare it with the number in China, it's like 800 million. What do you think has been the reason for the scale of poverty alleviation, and what has been some of the strategies that worked for China?
We said 800 million out of poverty, or Chinese government announced that by 2020, China is out of poverty, we have no more poverty. That concept, in fact, is what we said, the poverty means absolute poverty. The true reason why so many people out of poverty, if I point out the number one reason, is fast economic growth. Any government intervention for poverty, any NGO, any charities, in fact, play a very minor role. The real reason is really fast economic growth. When I was young, I was sent to the rural area, and my generation, after graduate from high school, all of them, you have to working in the rural area during the Cultural Revolutions period. Young Chinese, particularly those growing up only in the urban area, for them, if they go to rural area, mountain area, very remote area, still quite backwarded. So that's why for them, they feel a lot of surprise.
China has lifted over 800 million people out of poverty. And in terms of those efforts, there have been a few people who've been involved in the grassroots level social innovation and poverty alleviation. One of those people has been Professor Tang Min. He is the vice chairman of You Change Social Entrepreneurship Foundation, which is one of the China's biggest charitable foundations, and he has also been the chief economist and deputy director of the resident mission of China for the Asian Development Bank. And today we're going to be talking about all these efforts of China for poverty alleviation. How was it possible? What level of social innovation was needed to make sure that this scale of poverty alleviation efforts could succeed? So Professor, thank you for giving us your time. You were working as an economist before, and then you made this transition to work in the social innovation sector, and especially when it comes to working with the grassroots and working with the rural areas. Why did you make that transition?
You can say it's transition or not transition because Asian Development Bank is a development bank, right? And I work in Bangladesh, I work in Pakistan, work in Nepal, many countries. I have several times visited India. And our job mainly, though we're entitled economists, but in fact, most of the time we're doing the development. We're doing the poverty reduction, infrastructure construction, blah, blah, that things. So it's not totally new for me. I work in ADB for 17 years, and daily doing largely the same thing. But of course, Asian Development Bank is a bank, so we basically give the money to other people how to do those things. But when I come back to China and working in NGOs, and we back people, give me money to run that. So that's different. But in terms of contents, about the same. Yeah.
When it comes to You Change Charitable and Social Entrepreneurship Foundation, can you tell us how challenging has it been to lead a foundation of this scale, especially in a place like China?
Yeah, it's quite a challenge. You know that China, for quite a long time, we do not have a real NGO. And we do have some charity foundation or charity organization, but most of them are running by government. So we call them Gango, government-owned NGOs. Only after Sichuan earthquake, that's like 15 years ago, when during the first Sichuan earthquake, and a lot of general public deeply involved. And finally, government recognized that, this NGO did play good roles. And people find out that we can do something, we organize something, and we can help this social development. So after that, a lot of real NGO and private-owned NGOs starting to running. Of course, in the same time, the private sector in China is developed, and private sector, and when they're getting some profit, they donate money. So gradually, this area is starting to moving forward. Like any other sector in China, though we start very late or very small, but it goes really very fast. As at this moment, China already have almost 1 million NGOs, and so now I do not know what the exactly number, probably 20 million, maybe 30 million of the people working in NGO full times. So now do have some roles in the general public or help the society. Most of people working in rural area, because in China the big gap between the urban and rural. And if you visit China, you find that urban area looks quite modern, quite good, right? But if you go to rural area, you find it's still quite backwarded. And that's why most of NGOs are working in the rural area in China.
Two questions that come from this. One, you mentioned about the dichotomy of the urban area being so developed and the rural area still lacking behind. What were some of those shocks for you when you started traveling to some of the rural areas? What were the things that surprised you? Like, this is not something that I expected to see, and yet the situation is like worse than I had imagined. Are there some of those areas in China that you can recall, and some of those anecdotes that you can share?
Yes. For me, it's not that surprise. The reason is I'm quite old. When I was young, I was sent to the rural area, and my generation, after graduate from high school, most of them, all of them, you have to working in the rural area during the Cultural Revolutions period. And so we know the rural area well. Not well, but at least we got some experience. After the economic reforms, we went back to urban area. Then we go to university, and for me, I went to the United States to study there, and I have a lot of changes. But when I still remember what's happened and what's the situation in rural area, and after working in Asian Development Bank, I come back to China. Then I'm still working in Asian Development Bank. I know we were doing development. I also many times went to rural China. So for me, it's not quite surprise. But for the young Chinese, particularly those growing up only in the urban area, for them, if they go to rural area, and especially to go to those poverty area. Because rural area in China, again, there are some rural area quite beautiful, even better than the urban, right? But they do have some big mountain area, very remote area, still quite backwarded. So that's why for them, they feel a lot of surprise. In fact, 3 days ago, I'm in one of the minority area in Guangxi, from here about 1,000 miles away from there, and we have a urban education project there, and we went to these schools. It's quite a small school, only 13 students in a very remote village there. And their life quite different with those people living in Beijing. But they are, in fact, in the past 40, 50 years, their life also improved a lot. But compared to urban area, they still have a gap there.
And then you talked about the private NGOs versus GONGOs, which are the government-owned, non-governmental organizations. It sounds like an oxymoron, but GONGOs existed in China, and that was the way NGOs started. Right now, what do you think is the ratio between the GONGOs as compared to the private NGOs? And even on the You Change Foundation's website, I saw it says approved by the State Council. So do private NGOs also have certain regulations that they need to abide by to be able to operate in China? There's no free hand.
Yes, all the organization in China, it's like a company. You have to register, right? And company, you register in the registration for companies. NGO in China have a civil called the civil Ministry for Civil Affairs, and for all the NGOs you registered in this Ministry for Foreign Civil Affairs, they have a different level. You have a country level, have a provincial level, have a city level or county level. And for different levels, NGO you register there. Again, they have some rules. It's like any place that, like, first you get donation, you cannot put your own money, own pocket, right? And a lot of regulations and so on and so forth, because that have to protect the general public interest. Otherwise, people donate money and you spend the money, you waste the money, or have a corruption. So that will give a big problem. In fact, in China, they do have some problems like this, and create a lot of general public attention, because people have a good heart to donate money, and in the end of the money using a waste of money, and that's a big problem. So they do have a monitoring system to monitor all the Gango or private NGOs.
And what is the ratio between the Gongos and private NGOs in today's time?
Used to be Gangos dominate. But before I said the fast growth of private NGO, now the government, in fact, are shrinking. They are even smaller than before. But on the other hand, the real NGO grows very, very fast. So now, I don't know what's the percentage, 1% or less than 1% in terms of number of organizations. Gango is very small at this moment. Not because they're still there, but because the real NGO grows very fast. Yeah.
And now to talk about the poverty alleviation efforts, there has been efforts made in India as well, and it has over the years lifted 250 million people out of poverty. But when you compare it with the number in China, it's like 800 million. What do you think has been the reason for the scale of poverty alleviation, and what has been some of the strategies that worked for China in those efforts?
Okay. As an NGO, we always said, all NGO make a big effort, contribute a lot. But in fact, that's not true. The true reason why so many people out of poverty, if I point out the number one reason, is fast economic growth. Any government intervention for poverty, any NGO, any charities, in fact, play a very minor role. The real reason is really fast economic growth, like in terms of per capita GDP, right? 1978, when China started growth economic reforms, per capita only $200, maybe even less. Whole year you're working on the $200. Now it's like $13,000. You can see how much different. Because fast economic growth, then the rich people grow faster, and they're getting more income. But the poor people, again, their income also increasing. And this what we call the trigger down, right? And the wealthy really trigger down. So the poor people, they are also growing. And again, how many people out of poverty depend on your the standard. What's your mean of out of poverty? So now we said 800 million out of poverty used World Bank per dollar per day or something. That's kind of metrics. And then it's really 800 million people. Among these 800 million people out of poverty, at least 700 million, maybe more than that, is due to economic growth. Also, government specified the poverty alleviation program or NGO effort or enterprise effort for the poverty alleviation program. It did play some role, but this role may be reduced about 50 million people or at this small number. Because certain people, only economic growth, they never really reach them. The economic result never reach them. So they need a special attention, special measures. But that's a small number compared to 800 million people. This is, I would say, I never really counted, but I guess around the 50 million or maybe even less than that.
What has been some of the major challenges that these rural areas have been facing?
You have to fix the infrastructure because usually those people, mainly in the mountain area, and economic growth is not reach to them. So you have to give us, you build the roads for them. You have to provide the electricity, water, and job opportunities, and even provide the seats, and so on and so forth. And for their kids, you have to give a special attention to their education. Otherwise, they will not get the benefit for economic growth. For example, in urban area, a lot of job opportunities. But if your kids do not get a good education, they cannot catch up with those things. So that's why you need the government special attention on this area.
Another term that has been used synonymously with poverty alleviation has been rural revitalization. So can you talk a little bit more about this rural revitalization efforts and what do these actually entail? What was done in these rural areas to ensure that the economic growth reached them? There were job opportunities created, these infrastructure and all these other aspects of like public health and education was improved in these rural areas. What concrete steps were taken to ensure this rural revitalization?
We said 800 million out of poverty, or Chinese government announced that by 2020, China is out of poverty, we have no more poverty. That concept, in fact, is what we said, the poverty means absolute poverty, means those people is not lower absolute poverty means you do not have enough clothing when you're getting cold, when you do not have enough food, and so on. Your kids do not getting a schools, or you're getting a very shabby house, or maybe a very dangerous housing. That we call the absolute poverty. And by 2020, year 2020, that will be in nationwide larger. It's no more that kind of things. Maybe still have a less than 1% or less than 1% of people have that. Now, what we call the poverty alleviation program. After that, what we're supposed to do, then government said that we start to another program called the rural revitalization. Poverty reduction, we mainly targeting for those very poor people, but below absolute poverty people. Those people were out. Now we call it rural revitalization, means government have to take care of all the rural people. And how many people, what's the population in the rural area? At this moment, we still have 500 million people in the rural area. When we poverty reductions, we mainly targeting of like 50 million, 60 million people. And the rest of 500 million or 450 million people, for quite a moment, we do not put much attention to them because we have to focus on our resource to those very, very poor people. Now, all those people out of poverty, the government attention is starting to those all 500 million people.
The next stage.
That stage starts from 2020, called the rural revitalization. And that again, what we are working on is mainly in this area. This area, there are several things we are addressing. Number one is I have to improve or creating industry for them. Industry not necessarily like manufacturing, rural industry also. Let those people have a job, have a higher income. And secondly, we have to improve their infrastructure, living standard have to improving. So all those measures starting that. Poverty reduction, we have like a 10, 20 years effort. The rural revitalization, at this moment we said that forever, because that's 500 million. If forever we can improve. So we have no time frame for that. But there's stage. But by 2035 should be something, 2050 should something, but rural revitalization will forever should help the rural people.
And what are the concrete efforts that are being taken? Like most people who live in rural areas are engaged in agriculture and agrarian activities, and it is proven that you cannot earn as much out of agrarian activities as compared to like a manufacturing industry or a service industry. So how are you ensuring that the opportunities that are created in these rural areas can match up?
Okay, there were many measures, right? For example, for education for the kids. Now, during the poverty alleviation, in education, we mainly focus on every kids have to go to school. So all the efforts, nobody out of school, all the effort to that. But during the rural revitalization education, we focus on the higher quality of education. So they definitely everybody go to school already, but how can make this quality of education improving? Because in rural area, you may have a school, but the teachers very not very high quality, and if they do not get a high quality education, also in future they're still poor, right? So we have to improve quality of education. The other area is healthcare, because in China, in rural area, a lot of old people, right, and they may sick. You have to, again, we already have a lot of clinic. Every village you have a rural doctor, but again, quality is not so good. So all the come to quality. And also another area which you have a big effort is a rural toilet. And that's become nationwide program. Have to make sure every family have a good toilet. And until now, we still not fulfill this target yet. Again, toilet you have to improving also. And before you just have a toilet. Now gradually you have a nice toilet. And also we have a big effort to make sure the garbage in rural area have some good garbage collections system. Before the rule, there was no garbage collection. People just threw garbage, and the village is very, very dirty. Or in the village, the people threw the garbage there. Year by year, become very, very bad. And so now we have to have a system to garbage collections, to waste of water treatment, and all those things also in the rural revitalization. But number one issue still have to improve their livelihood, have to make sure their seeds have a high quality, they have enough good technology, improve their plantation, or some of the manufacturing industry or handicrafted industry have to move to a rural area, let the people have a job, and so on and so forth. And that very comprehensive. Everything's, in some sense, everything's you improve rural people's life and will be included in the rural revitalization program.
And what has been the role of NGOs as well as the social innovation sector in these efforts?
Okay. One is for income increasing part. This is not the NGO's specialty. So that part, let the enterprise, let the government run for that. Basically let them high income. Right? This is marketed to make sure. Right? NGO, we are more focused on the social area. What I mentioned, the education area, aging issues, environment issues, health issues, and so on and so forth. That area is NGOs main focus. Now more and more NGOs are gradually moving to this area. Again, NGO, we also have to improve our skill. Sometimes you do something, sometimes you do not doing well. And also we have to bring some new technology, for example, the internet and AIs. Now I'm working on AI. How can you use AI to help the rural people? I'll give you an example. We have a lot of kids separate with their parents because we call the rural migrations. Those their parents work in urban area and find a job there, but they do not have enough income to bring all kids together. So their kids remain in the rural area. Their grandpa, grandma take care about that. But you know that the grandpa, grandma is not really very care well, right? So now we try to use AI and give their parents what we call you can took a picture or a video, then use AI can do an image and look like you send to your kids.
Yeah.
And then the kids talk with your parents all the times. Say, for example, when we do homework, I do not know how to do it. But their parents are not around. Nobody can ask. Then they use it.
They see the AI avatar of their parents and then talk to them.
The talk with talk with the parents. The parent tell them how to solve that problem. In fact, it's AI is not real parents. But the kids look psychologically, that looks better, right? And that now some people working on that. This GPT, there's a new GPT, and a lot of things can do. So those area is now NGO working very hard, and hopefully there's some result from this area.
What has been some of the challenges in ensuring that these innovations that these NGOs are coming up with actually impact the people the way they are supposed to? Because when you go to rural areas, sometimes there's technological challenges. Like you want to establish a good school in a rural area, but internet connectivity is not that good. Even if you have a good model, sometimes it cannot be implemented because of the resource constraints. Or it could be challenges with the people that are there who do not know how to operate that technology. So how are you managing to tackle these challenges?
Right. In fact, in rural area, a lot of challenges, right? And what you mentioned, one one challenge is hardware. So internet connection, whether they have computer, whether they have a TV, that kind of easy to address or largely addressed already, because a government a lot of effort, put a lot of money, and this is 5G. And I went just a few days ago. I went to this Guangxi, very remote area, and surprisingly they have not 5G, 4G. But 4G is good enough for the class, right? Now, most difficult part actually is training. It's a teacher's training, because those teachers that graduate 10 years ago, 20 years ago, and then they not catch up, or there's new things. Right? And now a lot of teachers get the training for internet. Now they know how to make a PPT and use a little internet. But now AI coming again, right? And you have to catch up. And that training, this is what our NGO working on. That's it. We find out the most need is continually training of a rural teacher. Let them catch up. Let them getting higher technology. Let them not only technology, also the teaching style or even the way of teaching. They're still using a 20 years ago, 10 years ago style. Those days, people just teachers are talking, student involvement very little. Now in the urban area, we would call the student-centered training program. And urban area, they have a lot of change already. Students have a lot of participation in the class. But in rural area, students still just watching, just listen to teacher talk all the times. Now, we have to bring those ideas, training them to change the way of teaching. And that, again, we have to continue doing that, because those improvement progress is every year. Every year there are some new things. We continue training them. This is one example. The same thing like rural doctors, and the same thing like take care about aging people. That technology keep increasing, improving, and then those people need continuous training for them.
Finally, what about the revenue model and the financing? How are NGOs managing that? has it been that the government has been pouring in a lot of money, or the private enterprises have been pouring in a lot of money in this NGO sector? Because I know there are some issues that exist with foreign direct investment, or like any foreign funding for NGOs.
That's really a key issue for NGOs because as an NGO, we always said we do not have enough resource. We do not have enough money because the target a lot, the task a lot, because you can continue to improving. And China, the rural area is so big. Even we have a 20 million of the people working in NGO, but compared with 500 million people, still a small number, right? And the resources are always the constraint for NGOs, more active or more efficient to working on that area. Now, in China, majority, almost all the money for the NGOs come from private sector. Some from state-owned enterprises, majority from a private donation. Government have very, very little, because government only in the past few years, they started said, oh, we should outsourcing something to the NGOs, but they still piloting and not very large amount. Majority is almost all come from private sector donations, some from enterprises, some for the ordinary people. But compared to other countries, the small donations still small in China. Many countries, the small donation like $10, $20, a lot. There's a small donations, but China and most of the donations still come from enterprises.
So crowdfunding isn't really popular or easy in China.
And only during disasters, for example, suddenly have big earthquake, suddenly have a COVID-19 Wuhan, right? All the nations start to help them. During those periods, everybody put some money there, donate some money. Only during that period. In the regular, no big disasters, those people usually do not put money. But people are not used to donate money for that.
And what about foreign grants? Are NGOs in China allowed to take grants from like major NGOs or major international organizations that fund some of these social projects?
Used to be, for very beginning, a lot of early stage, lot of foreign funded NGOs in China, for Ford Foundation, for Rockefeller Foundation, for some donations for that. Later, first the real domestic private sector growing, so donate many for that. Also, government a little bit worried for some of those the foreign funded funds. That all the donation, they have their own purpose, right? And from Chinese government watch for some of the countries, what we call the color revolution, that in the Middle East, right, doing that. And the government getting a little nervous, said, oh, those donations is so good, right? But sometimes they're doing something which were out of our control. So government become very tight. And nowadays, if you getting for foreign company to donate money, so no problem, they are allowed there. If for foreign foundation donate money, and like democracy foundation, something, they're very, very careful. You need a special approval for that.
So it's harder.
It's a bit harder and harder.
And what would you suggest for somebody who wants to work in the NGO sector in China, somebody who's not Chinese? What are some of the key things they need to keep in mind, and what would be the ways to go ahead with this endeavor?
Right. I would say that if the volunteer, they would like to work in China, in fact, they do have a lot of, not a lot, some of the foreigners come to China as a volunteer, they're working on. I suggest Number one, you have to follow the rules, right? And the government have regulations. You the better so join the NGOs, join the already existing NGOs. If you start to own or you start from zero, that could take quite a year to understand. Or people trust you, people know you, what you want. Even language alone will take a long time. Because you just go to rural area, it's a dialect. It's not like you know Mandarin. That people understand a lot of the rural area, and they have their own local dialect. So if you join some the already very active NGOs and you working with them, that would be much faster and could be more efficient, and you would very quickly you can go to the grassroots and then you feel you can contribute. If you build your own NGOs and for registration is difficult, and you are getting a lot of bureaucratic procedures on that. I would not recommend for this.
Thank you so much, Mr. Tang, for talking to us today. You've heard the China story, whether it is about the fast-paced economic growth or the poverty alleviation efforts. But now all eyes are on India. There have been assumptions that India is going to be the next economic superpower if it continues to have the economic growth rate that it has today. But whether that economic effect trickles down to the rural areas, the peripheral areas, and people who still do not have enough to eat and do not have access to basic facilities, it depends on the efforts that are taken by the government to ensure that poverty alleviation and reducing the inequalities in Indian society is prioritized. Though there are lessons to be learned from the efforts made in China, but India is not China. Indian society is not similar to Chinese society when it comes to demography, geography, or the differences in their political and economic systems. As such, India needs to have its own model, its own adaptation of how it is going to ensure that it does not fall further in the global hunger index, that it rises above when it comes to reducing inequalities in society in terms of not only economy, but also in terms of social benefits.